All right, let's dive deep into Garibaldi wine country. I am so ready to explore this region with you, especially since it sounds like you're super curious to uncover what makes Garibaldi stand out in the world of wine, like their history, their grapes, and their sustainable practices. We've got a fascinating mix of sources for this deep dive, including excerpts from a Portuguese guidebook simply called Garibaldi.
It's funny you should say journey because Garibaldi's story really is all about exploration and evolution. It's often called the cradle of gaucho viticulture for a reason.
Okay, cradle of gaucho viticulture. I'm picturing like rolling hills, endless vineyards, and maybe even some gauchos riding horses through the vines.
Well, the scenery part you've got spot on. Garibaldi's in this gorgeous region of Brazil called Serra Gaúcha, known for its stunning landscapes. But the cradle part comes from the late 19th century when Italian immigrants, mainly from the Veneto region, came to settle there. They were drawn to Garibaldi because the terroir, which is the climate, soil, and altitude altogether, reminded them of home.
So they basically brought a piece of Italy to Brazil.
Exactly. And they brought their winemaking skills with them, transforming Garibaldi into the wine hub it is today.
It's fascinating. They weren't just planting grapes anywhere. They were really searching for a very specific terroir to make the wines they knew and loved from back home.
It makes you realize how much those early winemakers were thinking ahead. They really set the stage for what Garibaldi is now. But were they thinking big from the start, or was it more of a small family thing?
At first, it was all about family. Small vineyards, producing wine mostly for themselves and their local communities. But the quality was so good, it couldn't stay hidden forever. Their wine started gaining recognition, and it really boosted the town's economy and even shaped its social life.
So the success of Garibaldi wine wasn't just about the grapes themselves, but also the passion and dedication of those families. It's almost like their legacy lives on in every bottle. Absolutely. And many families are still making wine in Garibaldi today, using those traditional methods handed down through generations. That connection to their past is a big part of what makes their wine so special. But to really understand their wines, we need to unpack what makes their terroir so unique.
Let's get into the details of that terroir then. What is it about Garibaldi's climate, soil, and altitude that makes it such a perfect place to grow grapes?
Well, you have the climate. Garibaldi has this subtropical climate with cold winters, mild summers, and big temperature changes between day and night. Now, that might sound tough, but for grapes, it's perfect. The cool nights help the grapes retain acidity, which is key for freshness and balance, while the warm days help them ripen fully and develop those yummy aromas we all love.
It seems like those temperature swings are doing a lot of the work when it comes to flavor. What about the soil? What's going on beneath the surface?
The soil is just as important as the climate. Garibaldi's soil is volcanic, rich in basalt and packed with minerals. This is what gives the wine structure and that complexity that makes you want to really savor each sip. Plus, volcanic soil drains well, which keeps the vines healthy. Nobody wants soggy roots, right?
Okay, so we've got the climate keeping things balanced and the soil adding complexity. Now, what role does altitude play in this whole mix?
Altitude is like that secret ingredient that ties everything together. Garibaldi sits at about 700 meters above sea level. This means cooler temperatures and more sunlight. That combination leads to slower ripening, which helps develop those complex flavors while still maintaining the bright acidity we talked about.
So basically, this specific blend of climate, soil, and altitude is what creates that signature Garibaldi wine. What would you say defines their wines?
Garibaldi wines are known for being fresh, vibrant, bursting with fruit, but they also have this elegant minerality from that volcanic soil. It's a pretty special combo. You won't find it just anywhere.
Now I'm really craving a glass. But before we jump ahead, let's talk about the stars of the show, the grapes. What varieties should we look for when exploring Garibaldi?
Well, Garibaldi has surprising diversity when it comes to grapes, and it's that variety combined with the unique terroir that makes their wines so exciting to discover. But you can't talk about Garibaldi without talking about their sparkling wines.
Ah, yes, the bubbles. I heard Garibaldi makes amazing sparkling wines using the traditional champagne method. What makes them so special?
You're right, they use the metodo traditional, which is a labor-intensive process, but the results are incredible. Two grapes really shine in Garibaldi's sparklings, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir.
Chardonnay feels like a natural choice for sparkling wine. It's so versatile. But what makes Garibaldi's Chardonnay stand out?
It is versatile, you're right, but what's fascinating about Garibaldi Chardonnay is that it develops this unique mineral note, almost salty, from the volcanic soil. You won't find that in a Chardonnay from, say, Burgundy.
That's what I love about wine, how the same grape can taste so different depending on where it's grown. Now, Pinot Noir seems like it's trickier to grow, especially for sparkling wine. Does that make Garibaldi's Pinot Noir sparklings extra special?
Oh, absolutely. Pinot Noir can be a bit temperamental, but it thrives in Garibaldi. It adds structure, complexity, and these delicate red fruit notes that make their sparkling wine so elegant. And then you have the magic that happens during that second fermentation in the bottle. That's what gives those complex, toasty, brioche-like notes we associate with traditional method sparkling wines.
It's amazing how much time and effort goes into making those bubbles. So we've got the stars of the sparkling world covered, but what about still wines? What other groups are prominent in Garibaldi?
Well, Merlot does exceptionally well in Garibaldi's climate. It ripens perfectly, resulting in these smooth, fruit-forward reds. I hear they pair perfectly with the local cuisine.
Mm.
And then there's Cabernet Sauvignon. It loves the heat and sunshine, developing strong structure, firm tannins, and those classic black fruit, spice, and oak aromas.
So much variety, it's not just all bubbles then. Is there anything else they're experimenting with in Garibaldi?
Garibaldi winemakers are always pushing the boundaries, always looking for new possibilities. They've been experimenting with Tannet, which is known for its deep color and bold tannins. They're also trying Pinot Grigio, going for those crisp, refreshing whites, and even Riesling, that aromatic German grape known for its floral and mineral notes. So yeah, there's a lot to discover beyond the usual suspects.
That's definitely something to keep in mind when exploring Garibaldi wines. Now, I'm curious about the journey from grape to glass. Garibaldi seems to be all about careful handling and attention to detail at each step, right? What are some key things they do to guarantee quality?
You're absolutely right. From the moment they harvest the grapes to the final bottling, every step is done with the utmost care. And it all begins with knowing exactly when to pick those grapes.
I imagine timing is crucial. Pick too early and the grapes aren't ripe enough. Pick too late and they might be too sweet.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance, and Garibaldi's winemakers are masters at it. They carefully analyze sugar levels, acidity, and pH to make sure each grape is at its peak ripeness before picking. And here's a cool detail. Many wineries still do hand picking to guarantee that only the absolute best grapes make it into their wines.
Wow, that's dedication. I bet that really makes a difference. I'd love to see that hand-picking process in action. Speaking of processes, I'm super curious about how they make those incredible sparkling wines. Can you walk us through the key steps?
Of course. Remember how we talked about the Metodo traditional? Well, it all starts with making a still base wine through fermentation. Then comes the second fermentation, where they add sugar and yeast, and it happens right inside the bottle. That's what makes those beautiful bubbles. After that, the bottles are aged lying down for months, sometimes years, in contact with the yeast, which gives them complexity and those toasty notes.
So those tiny bubbles are the result of months of careful aging. I'm starting to understand why they're so prized. What happens after the aging process?
Well, there's one more key step. Whittling and disgorging. Whittling is where they gradually tilt and rotate the bottles so the yeast collects in the neck. Then, in disgorging, they remove that collected yeast, leaving behind perfectly clear sparkling wine.
It's incredible how much care and precision goes into every bottle. We can't forget about aging in general. Does that play a role in both sparkling and still wines in Garibaldi?
Absolutely. Aging is a key part of winemaking, and Garibaldi uses a few different methods to achieve different results. They often use oak barrels, which can add complex aromas like vanilla, spice, toast, even coconut, depending on the type of oak and how old the barrel is.
So aging in oak adds a whole other dimension to the wine. Does that ever clash with the fresh, fruity style Garibaldi is known for?
It's all about balance, and skilled winemakers know just how much oak to use. They also use stainless steel tanks, which are great for preserving those vibrant, fruity aromas. It really depends on the type of wine they want to make. And of course, there's also aging in the bottle itself, which allows the wine to mellow and develop more complexity.
It's amazing to think about how each choice, from the grape variety to the aging method, affects how the wine ends up tasting. Speaking of mindful choices, Garibaldi seems very dedicated to sustainability, which I know you're interested in. What specific practices are they implementing?
Sustainability is truly part of the culture in Garibaldi's winemaking. It's not just a trend, it's a real commitment to caring for the land and their future. They're using all kinds of practices that help maintain a balance between their craft and the environment.
That's awesome. Can you give some specific examples of what they're doing?
One of the main things they focus on is soil health. They use cover crops, composting, and crop rotation to naturally improve the soil's fertility and structure. This reduces the need for chemical fertilizers. They're also super careful about how much water they use. They have efficient irrigation systems, and they even collect rainwater.
So they're really making the most of what they have and minimizing their environmental impact. I'm impressed. What other sustainable practices are they passionate about?
Protecting biodiversity in the vineyards is another big one. By keeping the ecosystem balanced, they encourage natural pest control and don't have to rely on harmful pesticides. A lot of them are also moving towards renewable energy, like solar power, to reduce their carbon footprint.
They're covering all of bases. It's inspiring to see a whole region so committed to sustainability. It makes me feel even better about supporting their wines. I'm curious, are there any challenges that come with being so dedicated to these practices?
It's definitely a journey, and there are always challenges. Implementing these practices can be expensive, and maintaining certifications takes consistent effort and resources. But for Garibaldi, it's about more than just a label. It's about doing what's best for the land, the community, and the future of their wines.
I'm starting to understand why Garibaldi wines feel so special. It's not just about the taste, it's about the values and philosophy behind each bottle.
Exactly. And that's what we'll talk about more in part 2 of our deep dive.
I can't wait. We'll continue this conversation and discover even more about Garibaldi's fascinating story. But before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about.
Ooh, I do love a thought-provoking question.
Knowing what you now know about the hand-picked grapes, the meticulous winemaking, and Garibaldi's deep connection to the land, what part of their wines are you most excited to experience for yourself?
That's a great question. You've got me thinking. We'll have to revisit that next time and see what new insights we have.
Until then, keep exploring, keep those taste buds tingling, and cheers to the world of Garibaldi wine. We'll be back soon for part 2 of our deep dive.
Welcome back to our Garibaldi adventure. Last time, we were talking about how dedicated they are to the land and how they make sustainability a part of their winemaking process every step of the way.
It's a remarkable approach, It's like they're blending their respect for tradition with modern ways of doing things. And that blend seems to be a big part of what makes Garibaldi so unique. It's not just about the environment, it's about the people and the community there too. We touched on the Cooperativa Vinicola Garibaldi briefly in the last part. Can you tell me more about their role in Garibaldi's wine story?
The Cooperativa is a really interesting example of how working together and sharing a passion can lead to success. It was founded back in 1931, and it brought together hundreds of families. They basically pooled their resources and knowledge to create high-quality wines.
So it's not just a business, it's more like a symbol of Garibaldi's spirit.
Exactly. It shows just how strong the cooperative spirit is in the region. And the Cooperativa isn't just about the past. It's a major force in Garibaldi's wine industry even today. They make a wide range of wines, from everyday table wines to those award-winning muscatels.
I've heard those muscatels are incredible. But if the Cooperativa is so big, does that mean there's no space for individual wineries to do their own thing?
Oh, not at all. Garibaldi has a vibrant mix of both cooperative and independent wineries. Each one brings something unique to the table. You've got families who've been making wine for generations, passing down their secrets, keeping that connection to the past alive. And then you have these newcomers who bring fresh perspectives and are experimenting with different varieties and styles. They're really pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
It seems like a really dynamic and interesting wine scene, a blend of old and new, which is something we keep coming back to. And I bet that makes for a fantastic wine tourism experience. Can you imagine wandering through those vineyards, meeting the winemakers, hearing their stories?
Oh, absolutely. And the landscape itself is just stunning. Garibaldi is nestled in the Saraguccia. It's known for its rolling hills, picturesque valleys, and charming towns.
Okay, you've convinced me. Garibaldi is going on my travel list. But let's get back to the wines themselves. We talked about the main players: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon. But our source material also mentions some less common varieties like Tanit, Pinot Grigio, and even Riesling. What's driving that experimentation?
Well, Garibaldi winemakers aren't the type to just sit back and relax. They're driven by this spirit of exploration, this desire to see what else they can create. They're always pushing the limits of what can thrive in their unique terroir.
I'm really intrigued by the Tanit. It's a grape I mostly associate with Uruguay and those big, bold reds. How does it express itself in Garibaldi's climate?
That's a great question. Tannin is known for its intense color, powerful tannins, and dark fruit flavors. It's a grape that definitely makes a statement. And in Garibaldi's climate, with those warm days and cool nights, it ripens beautifully. You get this unique balance of power and elegance.
I bet that makes for some interesting food pairings. What about Pinot Grigio? It's a grape I think of as light, crisp, refreshing white wines, the perfect afternoon drink. Does Garibaldi's Pinot Grigio have that same easy drinking quality?
Garibaldi's Pinot Grigio is known for its bright acidity and those delicate floral aromas. It definitely has that refreshing quality you described, but it also has a certain depth of minerality thanks to the volcanic soil. It's a wine that can hold its own with food, but you can also just enjoy it on its own.
So it's a bit more than just a simple summer sipper. I'm noticing a trend here. Garibaldi seems to take even the most familiar grapes and give them a unique twist. Now, what about Riesling? That's a grape I usually connect with Germany and those delicate, aromatic wines. How does it fare in Garibaldi?
Riesling is a fairly recent addition to Garibaldi's vineyards. It's a grape that loves cooler temperatures and does really well at higher elevations. And in Garibaldi's terroir, with its volcanic soil and the cool mountain air, it develops this distinct minerality and those classic floral and citrus notes we expect from Riesling. But what's really exciting is that Garibaldi's Rieslings also have this vibrancy and acidity that balances the sweetness beautifully.
It sounds like Garibaldi is like a playground for anyone who loves trying new wines. There's just so much to explore. I can see why you called it a journey at the very beginning.
It is. It's a journey of flavors, of history, of culture, and of that incredible passion that goes into each bottle of Garibaldi wine.
Now, I can't resist bringing it back to food. We mentioned Garibaldi's Italian heritage and their amazing cuisine, but the guidebook actually goes into detail about local specialties: pasta, risotto, polenta, and galetto. I'm getting hungry just thinking about it.
Me too. And what's so wonderful about Garibaldi is that the wines are made to be enjoyed with food. There's this real sense of harmony between the flavors of the region and the wines they make. It's a celebration of local ingredients.
Mhm.
And the guidebook has some great pairing suggestions.
Let's dive into those. I know you're all about finding the perfect wine pairing to make your meals even better. What would you recommend alongside those Garibaldi specialties?
Well, for those lighter pasta dishes, like a simple spaghetti with tomato sauce, a crisp, dry sparkling wine like a Brut would be an excellent choice. The bubbles cleanse the palate, and the acidity cuts through the richness of the sauce. It's all about finding the right balance.
So it's all about matching the wine to the food and creating a harmonious experience.
Exactly. For a richer pasta dish, maybe something like a creamy carbonara or hearty lasagna, you might go for a lighter red like a Merlot. The fruitiness will go well with the tomato sauce, and the tannins won't be too strong for the delicate flavors.
I'm taking notes. Now, what about risotto? That creamy texture seems like it would be tricky to pair with wine.
Not at all. A white wine with good acidity like a Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc is a perfect match. The citrusy notes cut through the creaminess of the risotto, and the minerality goes so well with those subtle flavors. It's like this dance of contrasts happening in your mouth.
I love that. Okay, what about polenta, that staple of Garibaldi cuisine?
Polenta is so versatile. The pairing really depends on how it's prepared. If it's a creamy side dish, a light-bodied red like a Chiava or Pinot Noir would be great. But if it's grilled or fried, you'll want something with a bit more structure, like a Cabernet Sauvignon or even a Tannin.
You're making me want to plan a Garibaldi-themed dinner party.
Count me in. And we can't forget about Galetto al Primo Canto, the roasted chicken that's so popular in Garibaldi. They season it simply, just with salt and herbs, and cook it over an open fire. Crispy skin, juicy meat, it's amazing.
That sounds incredible. What wine would you choose to go with a dish like that?
A light-bodied red with bright acidity would be perfect, something like a Bardolino or a Valpolicella. The fruity notes complement the chicken, and those subtle hints of spice really enhance those savory flavors.
It's incredible how much thought and care goes into these pairings. It's a real art form.
It is. It's all about taking the dining experience to another level, creating this symphony of flavors that work together perfectly.
This has been such a fascinating exploration of Garibaldi. We've talked about history, terroir, grapes, winemaking techniques, sustainability efforts, and even food pairings.
It feels like we've covered just about everything. But of course, there's always more to learn and more to discover.
And that's part of what makes wine so captivating, right? It's a never-ending journey of learning and new discoveries.
I couldn't agree more. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to come back to something we've been talking about: the way tradition and innovation exist side by side in Garibaldi. We mentioned how there are different approaches to winemaking, the old ways versus the newer generation. How does that tension actually play out in real life?
It's an interesting dynamic. Are the younger winemakers really shaking things up while still respecting those long-held traditions?
That's the question we'll explore in part 3 of our deep dive.
I can't wait to hear what you have to say. But before we go, I have one more question for our listeners to think about.
I'm always up for a good, thought-provoking question.
After everything you've learned about Garibaldi's terroir, their diverse grapes, their dedication to sustainability, and the fascinating blend of tradition and innovation that shapes their winemaking, what part of Garibaldi excites you the most? What sparked your curiosity?
That is an excellent question, something to really think about. We'll come back to it in our next conversation and see if our perspectives have shifted at all.
Until then, keep exploring, keep those palates adventurous, and never stop learning. We'll be back soon to wrap up our Garibaldi deep dive. Welcome back to our Garibaldi deep dive. We've covered so much ground already in our exploration of this unique wine region.
It really has been a fascinating journey uncovering all the layers of Garibaldi's story. We've talked about the terroir, the grapes, the people, and their commitment to quality and sustainability.
And in the last part, we ended on a question about tradition and innovation in Garibaldi's winemaking. It's a theme that keeps coming up, this interplay between the old and the new. So, how does this actually play out in Garibaldi?
Well, it's a balancing act for sure. You have these families who've been making wine for generations, their roots run deep, and they use methods that have been passed down, from grandparent to parent to child. For them, it's about preserving their heritage, honoring the way things have always been done. They might not be so quick to jump on the latest trends or try new grape varieties.
That makes sense. Tradition holds a lot of weight, especially in a place like Garibaldi with such a rich history. But where do the younger winemakers fit in? They're bringing in fresh ideas, they're excited to experiment. Does that clash with the traditional ways, or do they find a way to blend them together?
It's more of a fusion than a clash, I'd say. The younger generation might be eager to try new equipment or techniques, but they also understand and respect the wisdom and experience of the older generation. They know that those traditional methods come from a deep understanding of the land and the grapes.
So it's not about rejecting the old ways, but rather about building on them, finding ways to make them even better.
Exactly. And it's this mix of perspectives that actually drives Garibaldi forward. It's what keeps the wines exciting, always evolving, while staying connected to their roots.
That really makes sense. It's about finding that balance between honoring the past and embracing the future.
And it's a tricky balance to strike. Not every wine region gets it right, but Garibaldi seems to be doing it really well.
It's really inspiring to see. It reminds us that innovation doesn't always mean tossing out the old ways completely. Sometimes it's about finding ways to improve them, to bring them into the modern age without losing that special something they have. And this seems especially relevant when talking about sustainability, which is such a core value for Garibaldi.
Oh, absolutely. Sustainability needs both the wisdom of tradition and the ingenuity of innovation. The older generation might have this deep understanding of the land, how nature works, how to work with the environment, not against it. But the younger generation might bring new technologies and data-driven approaches that can help them refine those practices and make them even more effective.
Sounds like a perfect partnership. The experience of the older generation combined with the fresh ideas of the younger generation. I bet this approach really resonates with wine drinkers like us who care about where their wine comes from and how it's made. We want wines that are delicious, but we also want them to be produced ethically and with respect for the planet.
It's definitely something I think about when I choose wines. I like knowing that the wine I'm enjoying is made by people who care about the environment and are thinking about the impact of their choices.
And I think that's what makes Garibaldi so unique. They're not just following the latest trends, they're creating their own path, shaping a future that honors their past while looking forward to what's possible.
And that authenticity, that genuine spirit, comes through in their wines. You can really taste the passion, the dedication, the connection to the land in every sip.
Now, I'm really curious to hear your answer to the question I asked earlier. After everything you've learned about Garibaldi, what aspect of their winemaking stands out the most to you?
Well, after this deep dive, it's hard to pick just one thing.
Yeah.
But I think what really fascinates me is how dedicated Garibaldi is to telling a story. They're not just making wine, they're preserving their heritage, showcasing the heart and soul of their region with every bottle. It's about connecting with a place, its people, its history, its values through each sip.
It's more than just a drink, it's an experience. And for someone like you who's always looking for knowledge and new adventures, Garibaldi sounds like the perfect place to explore.
Oh, it's definitely moved to the top of my list.
So was it?
And I hope our deep dive has inspired you to do the same, to go out and find some Garibaldi wines and discover their magic for yourself.
That's what we hope for, to spark some curiosity, encourage you to explore, and share our love of the world of wine. Yeah.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep exploring, keep those taste buds adventurous, and never stop learning. There's a whole world out there just waiting to be discovered.
And as always, stay curious.